I'm going to share my screen. And we're going to talk about SAFE, which is the software development method used by large corporations, and how we're using it at a startup. So the other notion is how we can give youth money to save democracy. And let me just make sure I've got the right one. I want to make sure. Okay, yes. So here we go. So we tell our youth that knowledge is power, especially in America, but what they see is that power comes from money. And we tell our youth to get involved, but they can't vote. So what they're left thinking is, how can anything change if so few people control so much money? In America, three men have as much money as more than half the country. And how can you make a change if you cannot vote? So power may come from money, but change comes from people. And we're building the first platform for democratic financial decision-making in schools. How? As you've surmised, we give students a real money budget and we support them as they decide how to invest it. They make real change happen in their school with real money. They harness money power. So that's the preamble. That's our inspiration. And now we're going to talk about how we're building this thing. So a little bit about me. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I'm also a philanthropist working in the space of wicked and technical problems. I've been long associated with the Agile community, and a husband and a father. While we were talking, I got one of the nicest texts I've had in weeks. My daughter said, "Daddy, I'll bring you dinner." So I had dinner too from the kids. So we're a benefit corp that uses participatory budgeting to teach financial literacy and expose kids to civics. So we all know the process, right? But we're actually embodying it in a beautiful, easy to use app. So the kids design the process, they create proposals. So if we show you pictures of our app, you'll see that it looks like Snapchat and Instagram and Among Us and other elements of social media that the kids know and understand, and it just works as an app. So they create proposals, they refine proposals, they vote using a simple mechanism of a single vote, and then the greedy algorithm, and we are using, in fact, a greedy algorithm, they fund the winning projects. So why are we doing this? Well, we know that there is massive disparities in wealth and income equality in the United States, but this is a global problem. If you look at research from Wilkeson and Pickett from the book, The Spirit Level, they find that you can correlate the index of health and social problems with economic equality. And the more unequal the society, the worse it is. So it shames me to say that America is #1 in all the worst areas, right? We have the highest incarceration rates and the highest homicide rates and the highest obesity rates and the highest mental illness and the lowest level of trust of all Western democracies. It's just really not very good. We're here to fix that. Now, this is the other thing that we're seeing, right? It is that civic engagement and trust in democratic institutions is dangerously low. So and that's what our earlier conversation with Christine was about, is that around the world, we are seeing the decline of civic engagement. And it's really very troubling. So why would we want to fix this? Like, is this good for everyone? Well, McKinsey says if we can close this wealth gap, we can generate $2.5 to $4 trillion in higher GDP. Part of that is because of the direct benefit of, taking someone who might be in prison and getting them a job. But the other part of that is taking all of those health and ill effects. Less obese people are going to put less strain on the healthcare system. Less drug addicted people are going to put less strain on the healthcare system and the social fabric of the country. So there's a real opportunity to change this very in a way that benefits everyone, rich or poor. So what makes a good start to a startup, right? If this is what we want to do, what do we need to do? Well, we need a big problem with a large market. We want to create an awesome solution with a caring and competent team. You have to be a little humble to think that you're going to be doing a startup, and you have to have a kilo of crazy, is what I like to talk about. So we're about fighting financial inequality around the world through this app. And I can promise you that this team is staying up all night with me. They care a great deal. We're both humble and we're all a little crazy. What my last company was based on a set of serious games techniques known as innovation games, which is one of my books I had written. So there's a lot of ways to build a startup, right? And these are all the things that we care about. You want to understand your customers, and you need to, I need to create, as the CEO, I need to create economic forecasts because I have investors. I have to convince investors, you're going to put money into this company and you're going to get a return. We need to experiment, but we also need to invest in the technical infrastructure of a very scalable solution. So it's got to be, GDPR compliant for Europe, and it's got to be COPA compliant for the US, and it has to be able to be localized. Nimrod, we're actually localized in Hebrew from some of my friends here in the Bay Area. So it's got to be localized into the native language of the students. So the Scaled Agile framework is the method that the largest companies in the world use to build the largest systems and software. And the question becomes, well, instead of thinking of the world's biggest companies, can we use it in a very small company? Well, right in the center is the customer, and everything else that we've talked about is in SAFE. So SAFE comes with 4 configurations, and we're going to start with the portfolio configuration of SAFE, which is these elements. And you can see that in this portfolio configuration, participatory budgeting is actually used. And Nimrod, I sent that technique to Harris, and I'll make sure you get it too. So there's some elements that we're going to keep, and there's some elements that we're going to change at the portfolio level, and there's going to be some elements that we defer. So the first thing that we're going to keep is, how do we build a company with the right partners? So the people on the phone call are actually not employees. They're partners of a company that we've worked with called Yellow Me, predominantly located in Mexico. And so I know the partners there. We create a long-term relationship. We started with 6 months. We extended it. We're extending it again. We work on very short, tight iterations, and we spend a lot of our time educating on best practices. So we watched Agile software engineering. My team has heard me give the pitch deck. We've done internal PB processes in the company to help them really understand what these processes are. We are now also working on product delivery, right? So I've got a lot of things that I want to be able to do about customer centricity and design thinking. I want to make sure that my team is going through these 1-week iterations, but we decouple the release to the customer from the iterations. And we might go 3 weeks without a release, and then we might have 2 or 3 releases in 1 week. It just depends on where the team is in terms of their development. So there's some elements that we're going to keep. We're going to make sure we know our Simon Sinek purpose. We're going to make sure we know our value proposition. We're going to look at design artifacts like journey maps and story maps. We're going to make sure we understand our personas, and we're going to even add stories that we can explain and share in this process. So the first thing is this notion of a story. In Agile, there are story maps, which are a way to define an interaction. But before you have a story map, there's a story. And our team has developed graphic novels of how our product works. And it's pretty exciting because you can see the vision of what we're trying to create in these stories that help keep us together as a distributed team. Now, we also do a lot of retrospectives, which is, as we're developing our software, we kind of analyze and think about, well, what's going on? And so if you think about the design thinking model, we noticed that we could improve our velocity and our development performance by designing with Flutter, meaning what was happening was our designers were designing certain activities and then kind of handing it to the development team to implement. But what we found was some of the designs were hard to implement. So our designers started to look at, well, what does Flutter do? And then let's design with that in mind. And a very concrete example is the design of our home screen. When you start up our app, the original design was based on video games where it was kind of like a map in Candy Crush or in like a Merge Dragons game. And what we heard from the developers is that that was really hard to implement. So what we found was a different set of widgets and tools, and the team recast this process through a very straightforward set of widgets that were available in Flutter. And it didn't materially change the workflow, but it was much easier to implement. And so this is an example of the student experience for ideation. So when they're thinking of a proposal, they can take a photo, they can add categories, they can even add videos, and it gets organized into a set of categories that the students will use to manage their work. In the voting experience, and this is something that's kind of unique, you were talking about, Nimrod, you were talking about making voting easy. So when we're ready to vote, you can see that this is the navigation of the list of votes. And we actually distinguish between funding something and an emoji. So if you fund it, you like it. But if you don't fund it, you can actually say, I don't like something. And that feeds into our algorithm. When the voting process is done, you can kind of see for the winning proposals, you can see very clearly how many votes they received. And yes, it is a greedy algorithm, but we're making it very clear for the students what this looks like. Now, there's a term in SAFE called system context. And a system context is where your system is running. So we had to make a pick about, do we want to run on the Google Cloud? Do we want to run on Microsoft Azure? Do we want to run on Amazon? And it turned out our partner and some of the people in the partner team had experience with Heroku. So our app at this time runs on Heroku because we were able to leverage the experience that our developers brought to the table about which cloud platform to use. Now, we also have to trust our experience. And so I mentioned that our app is internationalized. We've got a cross-platform client, so it can run on any device that the students give us. We have a gorgeous user interface that we've tested. We've got an API in the back end, so we can open up our capabilities to more companies. If you know what event sourcing is, great. It means we're fast and we can scale. If you don't know what event sourcing is, that's okay too. It means we're fast and we can scale. We have a lot of data work and we have a lot of compliance work because we're dealing with software for children. So we had in SAFE, there's a notion of what's called a program increment, which is roughly every 3 months, you're going to release a big chunk of software. But when you're starting from dead scratch, you have to do a little bit of work. So we helped the team understand the problem. We made sure they understood the mission. We chose the Uber architecture, which was Heroku. We invested in our data model, our UX, and our API. So we would do a lot of spiking of these things to make sure we were doing okay. We're a big believer in the patterns movement, and we leverage a lot of enterprise data model patterns from David Hay. We also leverage patterns from Mountain Fowler. So we were taking these very abstract concepts and then recasting them in ways that would be appropriate for the different roles and users in our system. And this is our rather large but custom state diagram of here's what a proposal is, here's how it starts, and then here are all the states that a proposal can go through, all the way through its implementation if it is voted on and selected. So we spent a fair amount of time really trying to understand how to build a proper state machine for both the PB cycle and the proposals within the PB cycle. So a few more ideas. Startups aren't always easy, and you hear this idea of a sunk cost, but it's really sunk emotions. So we started with React as our user interface. We had to switch to Flutter because React wasn't working. We started to explore REST, but our backend dev team made some really good arguments around the technology of GraphQL, and we convinced ourselves to change. We actually started our company with a different name Tilladin, and it turned out we needed to change. And we joke that even our first coffee mugs came out broken, right? So it's like one of those experiences where, man, everything's breaking and nothing is working. We were very agile. When our first customers started using our software, you could only create proposals. We didn't have voting up and running. And we literally had voting up, running the day before voting was to begin with the students. So it was very agile, sometimes a little too agile. And we've worked really hard on our CI and CD pipeline. And so within 3 months, our app was complete. So you could do all the phases. And now we're really iterating and making significant improvements in functionality in the core app. We know startups are hard, but we know our work matters, right? Remember this picture? And we know that students are loving it. Most of the EdTech software that's out there right now is just garbage. It has hard to use, ugly interfaces that don't really support the students very well. So we're making sure that we're creating something that's beautiful. We're learning and growing, and we're really happy to be using SAFE. So that's my very quick overview of how our company is creating its solution, and based on my experience in Agile software methods and in the Scaled Agile framework.
Thank you so much for the very quick overview. So can I just, can I install it from the App Store right now?
On the iPhone, yes, we're still, I believe someone's nodding. I think we're still in approval, right, Julian, Fede? We're submitted to Android, but we're not yet approved on Android yet. But you can download it, and we'll send you a bit of an overview of how you can. There's a documentation page on our website to guide you through the installation. We're in the process of merging the documentation into our app, so it's more of a seamless onboarding experience. We've got some improvements there. And then from a financial literacy curriculum standpoint, I should also share my screen and talk about the idea that if you look at FirstRoot and you look at our documentation page, you can kind of see all of the aspects of documentation. You know, how does the app do the theme? How does the app handle the budget? How do we do scheduling? And we also have what you can look at is our curriculum, which is a curriculum for financial literacy that is based on participatory budgeting. So if you think about planning, well, that's about making sure that a student has all of the planning necessary to be prepared for their financial journey as a young adult. Ideation would be like, well, what are my job and career options? Am I going to school? Am I going to military service? Am I taking a gap year? Am I going into a trade profession or an apprenticeship? And you can see that we're trying to map the flow of financial literacy in ways that would be aligned with the different aspects of participatory budgeting. Things like total cost of ownership and debit and credit and managing a budget. So those are all part of our kind of integrated solution for teachers. And the next curriculum that we'll be building is a civics curriculum. So we can support schools who have more of a civics focus.
Very nice. Do you have any presence in Australia as well? Because one of the speakers was an entrepreneur from Sydney.
Yeah,
right?
so Chris Self is, I have been blessed in my prior job or cursed with 3 million miles on American Airlines. So I've done participatory budgeting in every part of the world that you could probably imagine. So a few years ago, I did some work for a client I'm not allowed to name. I'll just say it was one of the banks, but that's, there's a lot of banks in Australia. On participatory budgeting, we intend to be global, right? We think that the problem is a global problem, and we're designing our system to enable a really large amount of money to be put into the hands of kids. So our goal, Harris, would be, and we call it our big, hairy, audacious goal, is to get at least $1,000 into 1 million schools globally and watch what happens when children are in control of $1 billion of capital. And I just want to add a zero to that. I'd like to see 1 million schools have $10,000 and watch what happens when kids have 10 billion in capital. So our goal is to really get money into the schools because the data suggests that they do great things when you give them the chance.
Very nice.
And I'm so excited because I think that working with people like you, with Nimrod and other researchers, you're going to help us, right? We're going to learn from you what are concepts of fairness that we can share and that we can promote with our students, because we want them to have a positive experience. And, you know, I don't want them to go through PB and then when they leave school, they're not civically engaged. I want what Christina wants. I want that when they go through school, they learn that participatory budgeting and participatory democracy is a way for them to make an improvement in their world. And that's what our overriding goal is. So if there's a better algorithm than the greedy algorithm, let's try it. Let's try and use it. Let's try it. If there's a better way, you know, to Nimrod's point, if we can design the user interface to be more understandable, let's take that on and let's try and get there.
Do you foresee any recommender aspects to it as well, like using AI to, if let's say some student has been proposing certain types of projects, then the system recommends them that you might be interested in this one, just like Amazon would make suggestions, etc.
Yeah, I think that, and I can't speak for the rest of the team, but I'll speak for myself. I would say a couple of things. In EdTech, there's a lot, and this isn't I'm being recorded. That's why I'm answering the question this way, by the way, Harris. Mm-hmm. You didn't ask this, but what we see a lot in EdTech is people trying to use AI to replace teachers. We're not going to even attempt that, right? We know that teachers play a vital role. We also see a lot of gamification in EdTech where you're trying to, you know, induce a desired behavior as opposed to leverage intrinsic motivation. So where I do think AI could have a great benefit is in helping students create realistic proposals by having them help them reason through the costs. If you go to our model, right, the student can create a proposal, but if they don't enumerate the costs, sometimes they don't get voted on a good idea. And it's not the teacher's job to fix that for the student. It's the students have to own their proposal. So I think one area of AI is in a sense, a coach that helps student teams think through the full implementation cost of their proposal. I think another element of AI that would be helpful is in detecting similar proposals. I think you talked about that a little bit. Maybe it was Nimrod, but one of you talked about like when there's merging of proposals, when there's similarity in proposals, we think that AI and linguistic analysis could help identify. And we saw this in one of our pilot projects. We worked with a school in Indianapolis, and 3 different students gave effectively the exact same proposal, slight word variations, but they were close enough that an AI algorithm could have suggested, hey, these look like something similar that's been done. So I think in terms of merging proposals and things like that, I think that's where algorithms can do a lot of work. I don't know if they're AI, right? The joke is once it's an algorithm, it's no longer AI because it's an algorithm.
So was this a brief snapshot of your first presentation, or?
That's it. I mean, the presentations that I wanted to give today were very short and focused, and that presentation is really designed to be about 15 minutes. About like, look, here's a brief overview of how we're using Agile techniques. Now, there are times where I give that talk and it's longer because I'm dealing with a safe audience. But here it's a smaller audience. So it was designed, and I also want to make sure you have enough time to pick up your daughter. We're a family's first company. So, if you need to, make sure that you have enough time to get your daughter, that's pretty critical to us.